All right, let's jump right in. Almost every country on Earth is basically drowning in debt. It's this kind of silent crisis, one that actually affects the money sitting in your wallet every single day. And it all boils down to one massive, unanswered question.
I mean, think about it. If everyone is in debt, who are we all borrowing from? Who exactly are the lenders? Where is all this cash even coming from? And maybe the biggest question of all, what would happen if the world just, stopped paying?
Okay, to really get a sense of the sheer scale here, just look at the United States. Its national debt it's ballooned to $36 trillion. That number is so big, it's almost meaningless. So let's put it this way. If you spent $1 million every single day, it would still take you almost 100,000 years to burn through it all. It's just staggering.
And look, this isn't just some American problem, not by a long shot. Take Japan, for example. Their debt is more than double the value of everything, every car, every piece of tech, everything the country produces in a whole year. That really shows you just how global this whole thing is.
So in this explainer, we're going to try and unravel this whole global mystery. Here's the plan. First, we'll cover the basics. What is national debt? Then we'll get into the really nasty stuff, the vicious debt trap. After that, we'll unmask the lenders, figure out who's holding all the IOUs. We'll even reveal a kind of magic trick that powerful nations use to shrink their debt. And finally, we'll look at what happens when the whole system just breaks.
Okay, let's start at square one. What are we even talking about when we say national debt? Well, the easiest way to think about it is like a government's enormous, never-ending credit card bill.
So officially, it's the total amount of money a government owes. It happens when a country spends more cash on things like roads, the military, social programs, more than it brings in from taxes. To make up that shortfall, it has to borrow. And all that borrowing, year after year, it just piles up. That's your national debt.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. A common question always comes up here. If the government can literally create money out of thin air, why not just print a bunch and pay off the debt? It seems like the most obvious fix in the world, right?
Well, there's a huge risk. See, just printing money without actually producing more stuff to buy, it just means every single dollar you have is suddenly worth less. If you push that too far, you get what's called hyperinflation. That's when prices go absolutely crazy, and all your savings get wiped out practically overnight. So that's why governments borrow instead. It sort of forces a bit of discipline that just firing up the printing press doesn't.
Okay, and this is where things can get really dangerous. Because when that debt pile gets too big, a country can fall into what's called a debt trap. And trust me, it's a really nasty cycle that is incredibly hard to break out of.
Here's how it works, step by step. First, a country has to spend a massive chunk of its money just paying the interest on all the old loans it took out. That leaves way less money for important stuff, schools, hospitals, roads. So just to keep the lights on, what do they have to do? They have to take out a new loan. And the crazy part is, that new loan isn't for building anything new. It's just to pay the bills on the old ones. And rinse and repeat. The cycle just keeps going.
And look, this is not just some textbook theory. For a real, painful example, just look at what happened in Sri Lanka back in 2022. They got caught in this exact trap. And when they finally couldn't pay their debts, the result was total chaos. Mass protests, critical shortages of food and fuel, and a complete economic meltdown.
So, that brings us right back to our big mystery. If countries are borrowing trillions, who on earth has that kind of money just lying around to lend out? It's time to unmask the lenders.
It turns out the money comes from three main places. You've got your domestic lenders, you've got foreign lenders, and then you have these special institutions like central banks and the IMF.
So the lenders basically fall into three camps. First up, and this one might surprise you, are domestic lenders. That could literally be you. Seriously, when you buy a government bond, you're actually lending money to your own country. Then, of course, you have foreign lenders. These are other countries like China and Japan who hold trillions of dollars in U.S. debt. And finally, when a country gets so shaky that nobody else will lend to them, they have to go to the lender of last resort, the IMF.
All right, now let's talk about a kind of sneaky strategy that wealthy nations can pull off to manage their gigantic debts. It's something that most other countries, and definitely you or me, could never get away with. It's basically a magic trick that uses inflation. So imagine this. A government borrows $1 million. At that time, that $1 million can buy, let's say, 4 houses. Fast forward a bunch of years. Inflation has gone up, prices have risen. The government repays that same $1 million. But now, that $1 million can only buy 2 houses. See what happened? They repaid the loan with cheaper money that has way less purchasing power. Poof! The real value of their debt just got smaller.
But, and this is the crucial part, this trick only works for countries that borrow in a currency they control. The United States is the perfect example. It owes money in US dollars, and it's the only one who can print US dollars. It's a massive privilege, but there's a huge catch. You're essentially devaluing the money of your own citizens through that very inflation.
But what happens when the magic runs out? What happens when a country just flat out cannot pay what it owes? Well, this is where the whole system really starts to break down.
This is what's called a default. And no, the country doesn't just disappear off the map. But what does happen is maybe even worse in the financial world. It loses all trust. Instantly. Nobody is willing to lend them a single dollar anymore.
And the fallout is immediate, and it is painful. Investors panic, they pull their money out, and the country's currency collapses. All of a sudden, essential things they need to import, like fuel and medicine, become crazy expensive if they can get them at all. This is usually when the IMF steps in with an emergency loan, but that loan comes with really harsh conditions. They're called austerity measures, and it means forcing the government to jack up taxes and make deep cuts to public services, things like pensions and schools. For the average person living there, it is a long, painful road back.
So, when you look at the whole picture, it's clear that national debt is a total double-edged sword, right? If it's invested wisely in things that are actually going to create growth down the line, new roads, better education, it can be an incredible tool. But if it's managed recklessly, it becomes a trap. And in that trap, it's always the ordinary people who end up paying the highest price.
Which, leaves us with one last, really critical question to think about. In a world that's basically built on a mountain of debt, a world where the very idea of money is being constantly tested by inflation and government moves, what is the money in your bank account, in your wallet? What is it all truly worth?